Good evening, and a very, very warm welcome to this evening session on the being organized on the sidelines of the Livelihoods India Summit 2022. Um, as you can see, we are here to celebrate development catalysts. We are in the 75th year of our independence, and we thought it's an opportune occasion to felicitate and recognize the work, a lot of hard work and toil of several civil society organizations, NGOs, development institutions who have been working. Of course, there are development institutions working in several areas, but we are looking at livelihoods here, economic empowerment. So we'll be felicitating development catalysts working in the area of economic empowerment for over last 25 years today, and acknowledge them and honor them for the significant contribution they have made to building of the country. We also, apart from that, have the presentation on the India's non-profit sector report, which should be an interesting, occasion to do that as well. And this year, it's BRAC's 50th year, 50th anniversary, and we have the privilege of having the executive director of BRAC International, Shamaran Abed, with us, and his team as well. So we are using that opportunity as well this evening to hear from him. To anchor the evening, we have a very special person, a veteran in the development sector, Professor Smita Premchandar, who's the founder and secretary of Sampark, an NGO that works for the empowerment of rural women and urban migrant workers. I'm sure she's well known to almost all of you here. She's a development practitioner, researcher, trainer, and consultant for over 40 years. She has been deeply connected to some of the most prominent and committed NGOs in the world. Of course, in India, but also in Thailand and Bangladesh. I would like to invite her to take the charge of this evening on this occasion of celebrating NGOs as development catalysts. Over to you, Smita.
Thank you, and absolutely a privilege to be here, to be talking to all of you, and to be sharing this moment when we are celebrating 75 years of NGOs in independent India. Most of us as NGOs, we actually feel a little bit lonely when we start. So permit me to speak an Urdu sher, which all of you know, but maybe it sets the evening for us. हम अकेले ही चले थे, जाने बे मंजिल मगर, लोग साथ आते गए, कारवां बनता गया. We've been alone and we've been together in this journey of NGOs. NGOs were actually active in India even before independence. We know that they were doing a lot of Gandhian or welfare sort of work, lot of education, health, women's development. All this was also happening before independence. So what happened after independence is that we inherited the welfare approach, actually. And we continue to treat women as family makers, mothers. They will grow the children into nationalists, into development people, and so on. And we continued, that has continued quite so many years. The recognition that women would be and need to be independently, economically empowered came in the 60s and 70s. And people should be having influence, voice, and agency. That came along with the Paulo Freire's book on pedagogy of the oppressed. Not that we weren't realizing it earlier, but I think he just articulated it well. And all of us at that time in the 1980s were developing self-help group approach. And in Bangladesh, the Grameen model and the village organization model was developing, and in India the SHG model was developing, and so on. So that did give a lot of voice to women, but still we were not moving towards empowerment. That move also was more economic development, more poverty alleviation, some talk of equity, but really empowerment approaches started in the late 70s and then grew and became off age in the 90s. So from 2000 and so on, we've seen one set of NGOs move into empowerment approach. We've seen one set of NGOs move the entire microfinance, which started in the development sector, move towards for-profit. And then we've seen a lot of governmentalization, especially of our SHG sector and so on. And we've seen a lot of corporatization of NGOs with the CSR money coming in into India. So there have been all these streams. We now have a very variegated set of NGOs. And we've also interestingly seen a proliferation of a second level set, which is of consultants, which is of aggregators, which is of fundraisers and fund linking organizations for NGOs. And this is another part of what's happening. Overall, I think in India, sadly, I have to say, the space for NGOs is shrinking. And it's difficult to make one statement. Of course, there are NGOs who do manage to raise funds and do a lot of work, but by and large, it's getting more difficult. And for linkages to rights and entitlements, for building voice, influence, and agency, for doing economic empowerment, social, political, cultural, these things continue to be difficult. And this means that it's also extremely important that this evening we are talking of NGOs which have sustained for very long, which have a decent presence across the country in different places, and which have achieved a lot of impact in different ways. So I'm really glad that we will hear from them. We will also hear from BRAC. I have had the privilege, Shamiran Bhai, of also knowing Abid Bhai. And really, I mean, if one can learn from somebody in the sector, it is Abid Bhai. What he has taught to all of us, whether we were consultants or whoever in BRAC and in the development sector across the world, 5 minutes with Abid Bhai was enough to bring back several nuggets. And Shamiran Bhai has already shared with us in the morning some of those nuggets. I hope we hear them again. But yeah, so I think what we'll do is that we'll first go to an overview of the NGOs in the sector that has been done by Catalyst and the ISDM, and we will hear their presentation. And then after that, we will have Vijay Mahajan, another veteran of the sector, another person from whom everybody has learned in India. We will have Vijay talking to Shamiran Bhai and getting us some nuggets from the 75 years of NGO development. So over to you. Where are Ramiz Alam and Gaurav Shah? Can you start your presentation? Over to you.
Opportunity to talk about this report. It's called India's Million Missions. Just setting some context for the report. So, state, market, and society are critical building blocks for the world as we know it today. The state puts in place fundamental living mechanisms. The market acts as an economic racehorse, and the social sector really is the social conscience of society today. Over the last 75 years, and Dr. Prem Chandra has really given a wonderful context, but over the last 75 years, the sector has done brilliant work and worked really tirelessly to improve the lives of the underserved, to improve lives of the marginalized. We've represented the voices of millions of people, the aspirations, the rights of millions of people. It's strange that, and it's ironical that while the work of this sector really impacts a large majority of the population in India, we've struggled to be mainstream and we've been relegated to the fringes. And that's reality. I think that's the context in which over the last 3-4 years, we've had lots of people in the sector coming together and saying, what can we do, if anything at all, to change the narrative for the social sector, and narrative in many ways. How do we get more positive stories out? How do we create more awareness about the work that we're really doing? How do we get youth to engage a lot more with the sector? How do we establish a different kind of equity within different segments of society, especially state and market? And what can we do differently? It's funny. It's also scary that look, there are good and bad people everywhere, and we should not shy away from saying that. But when it comes to the sector, there is so much of negative publicity which happens, and it's hard to get out of that sometimes. So, in just that overall context, a small group of people, and I wish that group had been larger, and I hope going ahead that group is going to be much larger. But a group of individuals, civil society organizations, networks came together and said, let's take a small step, maybe a baby step, in this larger, longer journey of shifting narratives. And this report, India's Million Missions, is one step in that direction. The report largely talks about 3 or 4 different things. One is, what are the services that the sector is really rendering? 2, what's the contribution to GDP? 3, what kind and what number of jobs are we creating as a sector? And 4, really looking at innovations that the sector has pioneered over the last 60, 70 years. The report's going to be launched in JLF over the next 3-4 days, the Jaipur Literature Festival, and then will be available online on various websites, but to start with, on the GuideStar website by the end of this month. Again, look forward to feedback, brickbats, encouragement. It is, as I said, a very, very preliminary step in bringing together this narrative. But really, really look forward to more and more involvement of people going ahead. I'll hand it over to Ramiz. I think he'll take us through just some insights from the GDP portion of this report. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gaurav. Hello, everybody. So in this report, today I just want to present the context for economic contribution we have made. And it was challenging to figure it out. But, okay, this is not a presentation. Just collecting data was very difficult because one is the first thing, I think, first accumulated report which came out some time back was in 2002 by Johns Hopkins Institute. And then MOSPI basically started another initiative in 2010. And then in 2013, a report was released, which basically gave us the number which all of us here, 3.17 million NGOs are registered in India. How many are operational, that we don't know, but these many organizations are there. So a lot of data has been derived from existing database such as of Reserve Bank, National Account Statistics, which is Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Explore data on informal sector as well from national sample surveys. And we also try to collate as much data as possible from national account statistics on GDP. Some challenges that we had in terms of once we found this data and bringing it back together and aggregating it, the NPOs spread across several areas and services and not really defined as a sector in national account statistics. Some major contribution of our work through the sector, which is women empowerment, human rights, democracy, freedom, rights and duties, making citizens more aware, all of that. How do you basically figure it out? What is the impact? Because it's intangible, right? So capturing that impact was also difficult. Then also the contribution to economic benefit that are likely to occur in future on environment, health, education, looking at the current context is already difficult to obtain, and therefore it was also difficult to kind of figure out how do we portray that. And then obviously a large part of NPO activities are voluntary. and 18.2 million workers, which also came out of the MOPSI report, are volunteers, and only 2.7 million are paid staff or employees, right? Moving forward, I think just to give the context, an international effort towards indention and classification of NPO sector activities have led to development of international classification of non-profit organizations. These are some of these parameters under which we have tried to bring out the contribution of the sector in GDP. Culture and recreation, development and housing, education, environment, health, international activities, law, politics, philanthropic intermediaries, and so on and so forth. So this is the, as you can see in the screen, the share in GDP in terms of INR is 18,355, which comes around about 1.94% of GDP. This is the contribution the sector is making in the GDP, which is a huge number. And it is growing. I mean, it's been growing for almost 0.5% every year. So it's increasing. And interestingly, this number, we don't know, because, I mean, we know what is the contribution of plastic industry in the GDP, but we don't know what is our contribution, right? And that's the thing. And we need to know, and we need to really go out and promote it, that this is the contribution we are making in the growth of the country. This is just another chart of the same. That's from 2010 to 2020 now. As you can see, in 2010 and 11, it was 1.47, and now it has come to almost 2%. So the sector is steadily growing, even after the effort in terms of shrinking the sector, which is there, right? Even after the negative narrative that is going around, that sector doesn't really contribute, we are growing, and we are actually putting a lot of effort. And this felicitation, which is going to take place today, is obviously the proof of it. This is just the characterization in terms of the if you can see the distribution of organizations, almost up to 50% organizations are operational under 1%. But just to clarify, this is the sample survey, which the survey we created, and we sent it out, only 515 organizations. And that's what is we are representing today. It's a small sample. As Gaurav pointed out, it's an effort we started, and we hope to continue to do it every year, and then the number will grow, hopefully. But this is just a small step, right? From around 34% organizations are operational between 1 to 5 crore, and then 16% above 5 crore. Almost 24% organization who participated in this survey are less than 10 years old, 29% 20 years old, 28% organization are less than 30 years old, and then 19% who are more than 30 years old. So this one is interesting. As you can see, almost half of the employees who participated in the organizations who participated in this survey mentioned their organizational employees, 50% of them are the sole breadwinners, right? So we are actually contributing a lot, like we are contributing in a significant way, right? This is 50%, and then others, obviously, who are coming and working, everybody who is putting an effort. So this is there. So this is about the funds non-profits are getting and the sources. I'm not sure if it is very clear, but one trend which is coming out, and it is interesting, that the grants from Indian Foundation, grants from international foundations are usually supporting larger organizations. The budget is above 5 CR. And then the self-generated revenues, memberships, subscriptions, retail individual donations. In that, if you can see, the smaller organizations, those have budget less than 1 crore. That's where their money comes from, right? And then, as we can see on the right side as well, that almost out of 515 organizations, 350 organizations are working on the issues of women, rural poor, children, then youth. Almost 70% are working with women, and then 64% with rural poor, 60% with children, 58% with youth, and so on and so forth. And then it goes down till disaster. One interesting fact which also came out in this report was out of these 515 organizations, almost 50% were working with on the issue of COVID when COVID hit, right? And we saw that government actually appreciated, and other sectors also appreciated, the effort the NGO sector has put in addressing the COVID issue, right? And it was just 50% of us actually working on it. So just to point out key takeaways, obviously 18.2 million workers are engaged in the sector, 2.7 million are paid. Most of the people are working either on a honorarium level or for free Shramdan. Our contribution is 2% in the GDP, and we are contributing on all the SDGs. Looking at that, I think this is just the beginning, as Gaurav also mentioned. We are hoping to continue to grow on this and bring more data. We are hoping to have all of you be part of it. Eventually, we'll be reaching out to you, Vipin, Vijay ji, everybody else, Chetna ji. So yeah, just thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Gaurav and Ramesh. This figure bothers me, 2%, and I don't want to believe it because I think we have the same problem as we have with gender, right? The rest of the world, the average women's contribution to GDP is 37%. In India, it's 18%. Why? Because we don't count our women's contribution. Lots of women are volunteers, lots of women are underpaid, and the Anganwadi workers were called volunteers for the longest number of times. Asha workers were called volunteers till they started unions and till they started protesting, and now the stipend is less than about 6,000 in Karnataka, and Karnataka is one of the best payers. So I think NGOs have exactly the same problem as women do, that we don't get paid. This 18.7 million, whatever number of volunteers, must be many more. And our contribution to GDP is hugely underestimated. I would say if you're publishing the report, please put a rider on that, because I think we should not go public saying that we contribute 2%. I don't accept. That brings me to Vijay's session with Shamiran Bhai. As you can see, Vijay has the ability to put everything in an articulate, funny, critical, and incisive manner all at the same time. So very glad that I'm introducing Vijay and Shamiran Bhai's session. For BRAC, I think I extend a welcome to you, Shamiran, on behalf of Access, of course, because Access is always in India leading these things, doing an NGO felicitation at this time, at this moment, is amazing. A wonderful initiative, Vipin and team. So on behalf of Access, on behalf of Sampark, which I'm a founder of, and I'm a board member of Bandhan Konnagar, which you know very well. CS Ghosh, everybody knows him here. So I'm also associated with BRAC since 1999, since the Rural Development Program started the microfinance work. Then microfinance started off as a separate program within BRAC, and is today also the world's biggest NGO program, NGO-based microfinance program. Grameen has 7 lakh savers, and I think BRAC has about 6 lakhs, but in terms of loans, possibly they are either equal or BRAC is a little bigger in terms of loans. They also do education, health, legal assistance to women, a huge amount of work, and again, leading work in gender-based stopping gender-based violence, and of course BRAC's work on its enterprises and doing value chain development work is amazing. I'm saying all these things to you because just in case Shamiran Bhai misses them, just ask him every question that you want. And BRAC, the other thing I want to say about BRAC is it's extremely self-reflective. When the rest of the world was growing the microfinance program, BRAC was asking, are we really reaching the poor? And in 2000, already in the year 2000, when the rest of us were actually forming non-banking financial companies, BRAC was forming the Challenging Frontiers of Poverty Reduction Program. Again, about 4 years ago, I got a message from BRAC saying, we want you to come and look at our microfinance program. And what was the issue? The issue was that they were saying our microfinance program is not really empowering women. Which other NGO in the world, known as the biggest and most successful, will come back and tell you that we are not having an impact on women the way we want to have? This was amazing. And I again, and then they've designed the gender transformative microfinance program, which they're going to pilot and roll out. Again, the first in the world, because they are self-critical, because they are transparent. And I think that's why I'm really pleased that Access has called them. Who better to moderate than Vijay? And I think I should let you enjoy both of them. So please, Vijay, come. And Shamiran Bhai, I think, yeah. Please welcome them.
Welcome, Shamiran. First of all, it's to me it's an incredible privilege to be able to sort of have this conversation with you. I think I've said more often than I remember that BRAC is God's own NGO. You know, it's like in India we say Kerala is God's own country. So it is indeed the world's greatest, apart from the fact that it's the biggest, but it's also the greatest NGO. We just heard from Smita some of the reasons. And of course, I was privileged to have got to know Abid Bhai long, long ago. And of course, have visited Bangladesh and BRAC several times. Coincidentally, I was last in Bangladesh when I was doing the Shodh Yatra, and turned out to be in Dhaka and went to see Fazal Bhai, and he said, "Arey, this evening Shamiran's getting married. Come over." So I said, "What are you doing in the office if he's getting married?" He says, "I'll go at 5, na." So, so what's the big deal? So one of I believe you just returned from Davos. Didn't go. Oh, you didn't go. Okay, good. Yeah, well, but anyway, I did meet Abid Bhai there more than once, and one of my regrets is that he tried to persuade me over 2 different years, saying, "Vijay, the two of us should together start microfinance in China." And this was in 2008, 2009, the year after the financial crisis. So you can imagine what a visionary he was. I just didn't have the courage or whatever to accept the offer, but if I had, it would have been just incredible. Anyway, so thank you so much for being with us here. It's also in another way, a special day. I'm a bit maybe, have the names been announced for the award-winning NGOs? Not yet. Okay, anyway, but I peeped at the book, and I'm also delighted that I'll be here for the next part of the function, because there are many organizations there that one has sort of spent time with or worked with, and It's great to be. It's great to be in the company of such wonderful people. And in that context, Gaurav and your colleague's name, Abhi, this presentation that you made, the effort is laudable, but Shomar, if you don't mind, we have to have some desi agenda before we get to international. First of all, I think to begin ourselves as anything, NGO or NPO, non-government organization or non-profit organization, is a travesty of history. Civil society preceded institutions either of the state or of the market. The primordial human institution is the family, the clan, the tribe, the society. And then when we needed to transact with each other, we came up with institutions in the market. And then we had to do other more complex things like defend each other. Then we evolved something called the state. So now to call ourselves non-government and non-profit is, why don't we call, for an example, why don't we call every business non-social organization? How would it sound? Huh? Tata is a non-social organization, right? And government is also a non-social organization. So it's as ridiculous as that. So we should refer to ourselves as to what we... No. The point is, if we as a sector don't even sort of assert what our identity is, now I assert our identity as civil society organizations. Okay? So the word NGO and NPO should not be used. One. Secondly, this MOSPI study. By the way, MOSPI didn't exist when the study was done. It was initiated in 2007. That famous number, 3.1 million, on page 2 of their own study, they said 3.1 was the total of all registered. But when they eventually did the enumeration, that number already fell down to 1.4 million. And when they visited, they could visit only about 26%. They could find only about 26%. So even in that 2009 survey, the number was actually about 24% of 1.4 million. Okay? And in any case, we are in 2022, and the authoritative data source is either Darpan or it is the 12A. Both the numbers are available. Darpan is now roughly 1,20,000. And, sorry, how much? 168,000. And how much is 12A? It's about 3 lakh, I believe. So if an NGO or a Section 8 company or any of these is neither Darpan registered, that means can't receive money from government, nor is it 12A, that means it can't really do much activity, can't have significant revenues, then it's trivial to talk about them, So the number is really 3 lakh. And that is a woefully short number for a nation this big, this poor, with this level of desperation of social issues that we have. In contrast, and let me come to Bangladesh, BRAC, its budget last year, 2021, was just short of $1 billion. Its microfinance portfolio had 8.2 million borrowers, and their loans, cumulative loans, were $4.5 billion. BRAC has worked, I believe, in over 55 or 60% of villages in Bangladesh, more than that, right? And you heard Smita's description. They worked in health, education. They're actually a relative latecomer to microfinance. And every sector that they touched, they made path-breaking contributions. The contribution to, child survival by preventing diarrheal deaths through the introduction of ORT, so oral rehydration therapy, saved millions of lives in Bangladesh. their contribution to rural education is legendary. The contribution to microfinance, etc. The whole idea of village organizations, no doubt picked up from the, the legendary Kumela experiment, but it was replicated by BRAC. But most importantly, BRAC is the place where the term social enterprise moved from being just a sexy catchphrase to being a truly functional example. Whether it was Arong, one of the first, social enterprises in the field of, handicrafts and so forth, to all the, so many, the biggest one, of course, I believe now is Bcash, and mobile, the world's biggest mobile money platform, and so many others. The incredible contribution of innovations at scale that BRAC has done is, I would say, one of the reasons why the per capita income of Bangladesh in 2021 was $2,800 and that of India was $2,100. As an Indian, I, of course, feel bad that we have been left behind, but I'm really proud that Bangladesh, which at birth was called the world's basket case, which could only survive on aid, as that's what they said, that in just 50 years, it's done so well. And the contribution of the civil society sector is amazing. Actually, BRAC, Bangladesh is a natural experiment for what would have happened to the world's nations if nations, social sectors at least, and development sectors at least, were not run by governments. It's the only nation where other entities other than governments ran the social sectors and the development sectors, and you see the results. It's the only natural experiment. And why is it a natural experiment? Because in 71, when Bangladesh was born, the administration was largely in the hands of West Pakistanis who left. Most educated elite Bangladeshis were not in government. Abid Saab himself was a CPA in Shell. Zafarullah Chaudhry was a doctor in NHS. Professor Yunus was a professor of economics. All of them were outside of the government. The first instinct was not to join the IAS or the IBS, whatever it would have been called, but to set up something independent, socially oriented. And we see the results in 50 years. So with that tribute to the past, I come to the task at hand. Shamaran. Since I've spoken a lot, could you first tell me about how you feel having taken over the mantle in some ways? Although I know you run BRAC International, and BRAC is, of course, a corporate institution, and there's a whole board and so on. But how does it feel?
Thank you. Good evening. Does this work? Yeah.
It's a bit directional.
Yeah. I'll get to your question in just a second, but just to say that this is a real treat. And Vipin has been saying for 2 days that I canceled Davos to come to this, which is partly true. I mean, I was going to go, and then my counterpart on the BRAC Bangladesh decided to go, so I decided to come to this. But for this particular session, I would have canceled Davos if because this is a real, and I feel in a way that we've got this the wrong way around, because I should be interviewing you and you should be speaking for the next, because, well, not only about BRAC, but, I was sitting there and I was struggling to think of 5 social entrepreneurs alive today more inspiring than you. So this is a real treat. And thank you very much for doing this. I haven't quite taken over the mantle. BRAC is a large organization, and as Vijay said, it's now quite a complex organization. So we have BRAC in Bangladesh, 50 years old this year, turned 50 years old in 2022. We're just at the beginning of 23, and in March we'll turn 51. BRAC in Bangladesh remains the largest part of the organization, and that's the mothership. There is an executive director of BRAC in Bangladesh. We also have the social enterprises side of BRAC, which has its managing director. And then there's all of our work outside of Bangladesh, and we started working outside Bangladesh in 2002, about a little over 20 years ago now, when we started operations in Afghanistan. And that was when Afghanistan had just come out of the fall of the previous Taliban government. And there was a lot of foreign aid flooding into Afghanistan, and BRAC felt at the time that, having worked for 30 years in Bangladesh, there was a lot that we had learned that we could apply in a country like Afghanistan, because Afghanistan in 2002 was in a way similar to Bangladesh in 1972, because there were a lot of displaced Afghans who were displaced Afghan refugees who were coming back to Afghanistan, in the same way that there were 10 million Bangladeshi refugees hosted by India during our War of Liberation who were coming back to Bangladesh when BRAC started its activities. So over the last 20 years, BRAC International has grown quite a lot. We're in about 10 countries with direct operations in Asia, but mostly in Africa. And we're in a few other countries now where we're trying to work through partners and especially work through governments to grow some of our work, mainly in extreme poverty. So I'm basically now managing all of BRAC International. And then we have a few other BRACs. There's a BRAC UK and a BRAC USA, which are fundraising affiliates. And there's a BRAC Global, which is the newest entity in the BRAC system that's basically there to make sure we're all coordinated and it's keeping the entire organization together. Yeah, it's, losing the founder is not easy for any organization. I think we've had to deal with it over the last few years. But I think BRAC continues to do well. I hope we are leading it all right. But yeah, I mean, I'll just say that, for my father, who was the founder of BRAC, he was very, very clear, even up until his last days, that BRAC should continue. BRAC should never be an organization that rests on its laurels and is happy with what it's done and thinks it's already achieved too big a scale, so we should actually stay where we are or even consolidate. We should continue to push and get bigger and bigger and bigger. And so being the largest was never enough for him. And even in the last days, he was very clear to us that the need in the world is so huge. If you look at anything any of the work we do and any of the sectors that we work in, if you look at the numbers of people in ultra poverty today, and of course, as we discussed earlier today, in the last 3 years, that there's been an increase in the numbers of people in ultra poverty. So about 3 years ago, we were saying about 400 million. Now we're saying maybe 500 to 600 million. If you look at the number of people displaced in the world, the number of refugees in the world, it's more than 100 million people. If you look at the scale of gender inequality and just that problem, there has been progress that has been made, but there's so much that needs to be done. And then across all of the other sectors, health, education, and everything. So I think for us, we just want to continue to keep going and grow and try to have more impact over time.
Thank you, Shamiran. The last 2 or 3 things that you mentioned, the rise of people below extreme poverty, and if we add to that, those who are in sort of, the poverty lines are fairly austerely defined. So even if one is just slightly above the poverty line, it's not as if you have a comfortable, dignified life. It's still very vulnerable. Plus the environmental crisis that you talked of, and if I may add, I think which is a result of this, maybe collective psychosomatic response to all the trouble that we're going through, which is an incredible epidemic of the rise of intolerance, mutual dislike to the point of view of hatred, violence, all of that. At an individual level, there's an epidemic of depression. At family breakdowns, there's sort of it's kind of so. At one level, we seem to be living, in Armageddon times. Pralay aa raha hai, as they say. And so, while of course it's brave of BRAC and all of us in the sector to say that we will continue to work to alleviate this situation, but there is at least, and I know it was always in the person of Abid Saab himself, but formally in the BRAC structure, there is a BRAC university as well. And, applying knowledge to understanding why we are where we are, and therefore what we can do about it, is again, it's an unusual characteristic. Usually the attempt is to plunge into action in response to whatever visceral analysis one does, and that's it. So, as someone who has to think at a strategic level, first of all, do you see there is a structural connection between these what I call the triple crisis, the social, economic, and the environmental crisis? And is it a systemic issue that, as a collective, as a global collective, have we made wrong choices? And is it time for us as civil society to say, hey, including you, Mr. Politics, to whom we've assigned the job to manage some affairs, you're not our boss, right? Will you please get off your singhasan and explain why the world is in this trouble and listen to our analysis also? Is there a role for civil society actually to both deal with institutions of the market and institutions of the state and say, excuse me, can you explain why all this is happening while we put you in charge? And don't tell us to keep quiet just because you're giving 1% of your profits as CSR or some tax deduction. You can keep that. We as citizens want to reserve our right to hold you accountable because we've given you the power to run public affairs. So, at a different level, as one of the leaders of the civil society world, what do you think?
Yeah. So first of all, to your question, do I see it as linked? Yeah, of course it is. So there are multiple, I think there are different crises that are happening. On the one hand, we see some that are very clear, the climate crisis, the COVID over the last 3 years, what conflict is doing to the world, right? That's very clear to see. But again, there are sort of, for us as a sector, there are other things at play. And I think in all of our countries, we're seeing some of that. Shrinking space, as Mita talked about, a growing sort of sense of unaccountability, of state institutions or of governments. And that's not in one or two countries. We're seeing that across the world. Look at what's happening in Russia, look at what's happening in Hungary, look at what's happening in many parts of the world and many of our parts of the world. And it is the role of civil society in a way to hold governments accountable as well. And different types of civil society organizations do it in different ways. So I think for me, it's sort of in what way do you hold governments accountable? So what BRAC has always done, and whether that's the right way to do it or not, you all will decide, or time will tell. But what we've done, at least in Bangladesh, and obviously now we work in many other countries, we've never gotten sort of into direct conflict with the politicians or the governments. What we've tried to do is empower the grassroots and educate, empower, and increase agency and voice, right? Now, I do get what you're saying, is after all of that, what's happened? Because in some senses, the space is shrinking further and our voice is getting even more restricted. So yeah, to tell you the truth, I don't know if that's the right way. There are many organizations that are much more direct in their advocacy and in their attempt to hold states and governments accountable. I don't know if I have an answer to that, but we've tried to do it in a different sort of way. Again, going back to Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed, the whole BRAC idea from there was that, poverty is an issue of power, and the poor are poor because they are powerless. And unless poor people are organized for power, and unless they have that agency to be able to change their own lives, you can't sustainably end poverty, or you can't sustainably bring people out of poverty. So from that perspective, BRAC always says that it's not BRAC that that does the development. People develop themselves. BRAC's role and the role of civil society organizations is to create the enabling environment and give people the tools, the opportunities, the resources that they need to be able to transform their own lives and try to change the power dynamics through that. At this point, it's hard to see how that is changing the power dynamic. I take your broader point. I don't know if I have an answer to your...
You're so right. Your last thing actually reminded me of a manuscript that I had. In those days, things used to be not even Xerox. They used to be cyclostyled. So there's this book, or I only saw it in a cyclostyle form. It was called The Net. Famous study of the political economy of the Bangladeshi village. And I remember, I think I read it in 82 or 83, sometime like that. And I didn't know Abid Sab at that time. So I told Deep Joshi, who was at the Ford Foundation, who had given me the book, saying, I said, whoever's done this, he must be a scientist, yeah. Because my view was that, it's done so it's like such a fantastic confrontation of the truth that, I sort of, being trained as an engineer, I went, has to be a scientist. So Deep told me, no. Abed used to be an accountant in Shell. So I said, Acha, okay, anyway. But many years later, I met Abed Sab and I asked him, I recall this story to him. So he says, Vijay, physicists and accountants do the same thing. They look at numbers and they draw conclusions based on that. So that fact-based, evidence-based, analytical, action is another example of BRAC's genetic code. Smita also referred to that other famous study when they, after being one of the greatest microfinance institutions in the world, they said, oh, but excuse me, it doesn't seem to empower the poor. And out of that insight came, or out of that confession came a new insight, and that's become, I think, probably the greatest gift of BRAC to the world's poor, which is the graduation program. Which, when I checked the numbers last, had already graduated 2.1 million people around the world out of extreme poverty. And in 8 countries, and in 11 more, BRAC is working with them, and there are 100 plus partners. I remember when this was just a pilot project in BRAC, and it was, It seemed like a good idea, but it just, its success was just astounding. And I'm so delighted that it got built into a global program. So can you tell us a little more about the graduation program and its how it's panning out?
Thank you very much. So the graduation program started 20 years ago, a little over 20 years ago in Bangladesh. So, exactly right. So after many years of working with what we thought or who we thought were the poorest of the poor, there was a realization around the mid to late 90s that actually many of our development interventions and actually many of the development interventions that anyone does, including state and civil society organizations, actually don't reach the poorest of the poor. And the poorest of the poor are so poor and so marginalized and so socially invisible that unless you go and really look for them, you won't even find them. So you could go walk around a village and you think you're looking at a very poor people, but the poorest of the poor, even there, are not visible. Their level of vulnerability and exclusion is so high. So we started a program 20 years ago. The program, I won't bore you with the details of the program, but just to say the program targets those households which are truly the ultra poor households. They tend to be traditionally women-headed households for all the reasons that you can imagine. And we take them through 2 years of a sequence set of interventions, which include a big push investment, confidence building, training. There are many elements of the program, like stipends, inclusion in a savings program, and the idea is that at the end of 2 years, that they will come out of that level of ultra poverty. It doesn't mean that at the end of 2 years they're not poor anymore. They're still very poor people, but they can come out of that level of ultra poverty and then get on a sustainable pathway that they can continue to progress out of poverty. The thing I do want to say about the program is that one of the things that we've learned that's been very important to learn, and we learned it quite early, was that the hard elements of the program, the asset transfer, the stipend support, the skills training, all of that critically important, but just as critically important, if not more important, are some of what we call the softer elements of the program. And those are sort of the building of self-worth, yes, and the sparking of hope and the building of confidence. Because if you are somebody in that level of poverty, you don't have your perspective is very short term. You can only think about tomorrow. You can't plan for the future. You have no hope of being able to get out of that state of existence. You don't think that your children will be any better off than you were, or your parents or your grandparents were. So it's a very fatalistic, very hopeless situation. Nobody likes you. Nobody wants to talk to you because you are continuously asking for help. So even within your own community, you have no social capital. It's very dehumanizing, that level of poverty. And what we found is just being part of a program, being part of a collective of women just like you, having a weekly visit by a program staff who comes and asks you how you are and how your children are and what you ate in the last 7 days and how your asset is doing and giving you some training. Just that inclusion into something is extremely powerful. And that we found to be just as powerful as all the other support that we give through assets and training and stipends and savings accounts and other things. So that program over 2 years has great results. BRAC has done it now for 20 years. Many other organizations have done it in different parts of the world, from South Asia to the Middle East to East and West Africa, all the way to Latin America. There's been a great amount of, a lot of it actually thanks to Professor Hashmi, who I saw somewhere on the back. And you heard him speak earlier today at the Livelihoods Conference. Because when he was at the World Bank, he took this BRAC idea and got the Ford Foundation to fund a lot of the pilots of this program in many parts of the world. And the evidence that got generated out of those pilots were just as impressive, if not more impressive. And that has led to now a worldwide movement. And we're trying to do a lot of work in it ourselves. You know, Greg, who leads the Ultra Pro Graduation Initiative for BRAC, and a lot of our other UPGI colleagues are in the room as well. And now what we're trying to do is, in addition to us as a civil society organization scaling graduation programs ourselves, we feel that we can have a much bigger impact by trying to scale graduation type evidence-backed programs through governments. Because ultimately the scale that we need to reach to have a dent on global extreme poverty in the next, well, it's not going to happen in the next 7 years till 2030, but even if we were to do it in the next 10, 15 years, it will need a scale of implementation that is doable only by governments. So that's where it is now. But it has grown into something much bigger than BRAC, thankfully.
Thank you. So Smita, when Shamaran was answering the first half of the question, you probably saw Paulo Freire smiling from upstairs, right? When he was saying that, you know, it's the psychological rebuilding of the self that's the key. Indeed, we tried the graduation program in Bihar. We meaning when I was in basics, and we purposely chose two different villages. One in which there were what are called Mahadalit Musahars, and in another it was a OBC community, the Yadavs, and it there are relatively few Yadavs who are poor, but even among them there were women who were poor. They took off within 3 to 6 months, and the Musahars went nowhere for 2 whole years, and till we realized that we have to do more than economic interventions. And as soon as we switched to, you know, some of those psychological conversations using very rudimentary pedagogy of the oppressed kind of work, it worked there also. So it's, and I'm since we're talking about Bihar, I'm delighted to say that you know, Jivika, Bihar State Rural Livelihood Mission adopted the idea and is doing a lot. There's a whole special program covering about 100,000 families who couldn't be covered by an otherwise extensive self-help group program in Bihar, over 10 lakh self-help groups. And these 1 lakh are the ones who were left out. They were too poor for even self-help group women to include them. So it's making a huge difference. But you know, you in your answer, in your intervention, you also answered one of my earlier questions, which is, should civil society hold governments to task? And I think you've answered in detail that it should, but how? And instead of haranguing government, what you're saying is, let's take on the challenges which they're trying to address, which we all need to try and address. But let's do it in a manner where it really makes a serious, tangible difference, subjected to the most rigorous external assessment. And, you know, since right now RCTs are the gold standard, we shall settle for it. I must say, even Esther has now started recognizing this, that there is something called hope and optimism. So that's nice. You know, Esther Duflo. But nevertheless, with that evidence and a solid methodology, you then go to the government and say, listen, this works. This is the way to do it. If you need help to scale up, we are there. But it's really your responsibility to do this. And that's a very different kind of advocacy than Amnesty International or so on, which is also needed, MDGs, all of that. But I think it's very important to do this in a practical way. Maybe there are people in the audience who would like to just exchange some comments or ask a question of Shamiran. Chetna ji, would you? Chetna Galasena runs a very remarkable organization called Mandeshi Women's Cooperative Bank in Western Maharashtra. Do you need a mic?
The delegation, which Abid Saab did it so well. So founders are always so much concerned about that. So.
Thank you very much. So I think I might have said a little bit about it in my first answer, but I think for him, so I'll say a couple of things about what was very important to him in the way that he built BRAC and got BRAC to where it is today. You see, if you look at the NGO sector globally, right? There are lots of great civil society civil society sector. There are lots of great civil society organizations that work in their own countries, right? But typically, the way the global NGO sector works is all the money comes from the global north. A lot of the fundraising actually happens through institutions that are based in the global north. So most of the large INGOs of the world are also organizations of the global north. The ones that everybody can name, the Oxfams, the Save the Children's, CARE, they're all global north organizations. And then there are a lot of now, in the last couple of decades, a lot of private sector contractors in the global north that get a huge part of the global, international development pot, right? Then they come to countries like ours, they set shop, they find local partners to do the actual implementation on the ground, and these organizations become sort of the prime recipient, and you have a whole bunch of local sub-recipients, the local organizations that do the implementation, but the relationship with the donor and all the glory is kept by the primes, who are the northern organizations or the northern contractors, right? And one of the things BRAC was very clear about it from very early days is that we don't want to become a traditional sub-recipient to global north organizations. So BRAC always decided we're going to decide what programming we want to do, given what we are understanding working closely with the communities that we work with. And we will set our own agenda, and we will raise money directly from donors to fund our agenda. And BRAC was able to do that very successfully in Bangladesh over many years. And then when we went outside Bangladesh, we tried to follow in the same way. So to your question, and that was one. And the other thing, of course, was BRAC always wanted to be big. So I think I already said that. My father was very clear and very relentless in his pursuit for scale. He really believed that you can't be impactful if you're small. I mean, that was his belief. Everybody doesn't have to agree with that. He always believed that if you could innovate something and do it well in 5 villages, you could do it in 50,000 villages. So there's no point doing it in 5 villages if you can do it in 50,000 villages, so you might as well go for it. And that was something that was very clear to him. So in terms of your question, what are we trying to do to make sure that we take his legacy forward, is to try to be true to those things. So one of the challenges, you said, what are the biggest challenge? One of the biggest challenges now is as we become a larger international organization, we're having to bring in a lot of people who come from the NGO sector outside of BRAC. So the first 35 years of BRAC was led by homegrown people who grew with the organization, started with the founder generation, over 30 years became the senior leadership, and from when BRAC was very small till BRAC became the largest NGO in the world, it was the same people leading it. Now we have people from all types of organizations, local organizations, global organizations. And one of the challenges, so in the way that we are trying to recruit and bring in talent, we need them. We need these people to bring in their expertise and their know-how into the organization and strengthen BRAC. But one of the main challenges is, are they going to be able to work in the way that we want to work? So we don't want to turn BRAC into a Save the Children or CARE, right? We're not trying to become a Southern organization that mimics the Northern organizations. We're trying to become a Southern organization that establishes and puts it and really stamps its mark in the global development space. And so for people coming from working 30 years in some of those Northern organizations to us, it's how do we BRACify them faster than they can carify us, And I say that, I know CARE, I know access comes out of CARE, so I have to be careful what I say here. But now you're not there anymore.
Now you're getting into brackish waters.
But that is a challenge. But so far going okay, and of course that continuing to want to grow our impact as much as we can. I think that's really important for us, and that would be something that for him would have been very important.
Yes, please.
So I am Subrata Chatterjee. I work with Pradhan, an organization that Vijay and Deep founded way back in 1983. So many models, BRAC, Pradhan, and several other organizations you have already mentioned. So many models, well-intentioned, fantastic designs, so many magnificent brains. But the problem is increasing. How you and people in BRAC try to grapple with that kind of a mental tension. Is there any mental tension at all? Or, what kind of a mentoring that happens with new people coming in the organization when they ask these kinds of questions, if they at all, that so many things done, but still the problems are growing, numbers are growing. So what exactly happens there?
Yeah, actually, you know what? I mean, in most of the contexts that we work in, the last few years have been a little bit different. Numbers have grown. But if you look at, 50 years, or if I just talk about my own country, Bangladesh, if you look at 50 years of Bangladesh, the problems have not grown. A lot of problems have not been solved, but a lot of issues have been addressed quite successfully, right? At the time of liberation in 1971, but 1972, the first full year of a liberated country, Bangladesh's, let's say, fertility rate, 7. So 7 child per mother, right? A population growing at a level that is uncontrolled, right? Bangladesh, without having something like a one-child policy like China, has been able over the first 35 years of its existence to bring it from 7 to 2.1, which is replacement rate, right? Just through social programs, right? A lot of it done by the civil society organization, but some of it done by the government, right? Bangladesh had one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world. Bangladesh had one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. Now it's among the lowest in the developing world. We're still some way short of the developed world. But if you compare us to developing countries, we're leading the pack, leading a lot of them in a lot of these indicators. GDP is one, obviously. I don't think GDP is the greatest measure of human well-being, but it's done fairly. I mean, Bangladesh has done fairly well. But if you look at all the social indicators, Bangladesh was one of the first countries to reach gender parity in primary education, which is one of the MDG goals. It was, in the previous to the SDGs, because it invested in girls' education. And again, because of the push that a lot of our types of organizations did, but also the government took that up. So I'm talking about Bangladesh only because I know it best, but please don't think that I'm here to boast about Bangladesh. If I look across the world, India, across South Asia, across parts of Africa, there has been huge progress made in the last several decades. So I don't think any of us should feel that after decades, after 50 years or 75 years of civil society work, the things have actually gotten worse. The human condition today is much better on average than where we were in 1971 or 1947. All right? Way better. Of course, there are still huge problems, and there are still issues that are going to throw up bigger. So climate will become a massive existential threat for the world. Ukraine and Syria and Afghanistan and conflicts like that will continue to have big impact on the global economy and increase food prices, increase energy prices, and push more people into poverty. But no, so my answer is our work has had a huge impact on the world. And I also, again, I don't think we should measure our contribution to the world or to any country by our contribution to GDP. Whether it's 2% or 8%, I don't know. But the contribution is way beyond that. If you look at the contribution that civil society organizations have made to social indicators around India, Bangladesh, or any part of Asia or Africa or Latin America, it's massive. So in this room, I can say it. I think we really should give ourselves a pat on our backs, and feel like and not feel hopeless at all. There's a lot more to do, but there is a lot of know-how that we already have. We have to continue. We have to just keep scaling things that we know work. And one of the things that my father used to say is, so one I mentioned earlier today, which is small is beautiful, large is necessary. Another thing he used to say, because if you look at donor calls now, you're an NGO, you wait for the donor to do a call for proposal and you respond to that. Every call asks for an innovation. Everything has to be innovative, right? Everything. So he used to say, if you are innovating all the time, then who is scaling the things that we already know works, right? So sometimes just focus on scaling what you already know works, because that's even more important than continuously innovating, because solutions need to be scaled.
Suparna, shonechen? Ki? Great. So I think it was explained in the most wonderful way. If I may just add a footnote, that it is true that problems are apparently rising. Certainly, if you take certain numbers, number of poor who've fallen below poverty line, et cetera, particularly post-COVID, all of that. But if you start doing a reverse count, for example, just to give you my favorite Indian example, when people say कि 70 साल में कुछ नहीं हुआ, etc. So when India became independent, our life expectancy was 32 years. Average life expectancy of India was 32. Now it is 69. Okay? We've added 37 years of life to every one of the 1.3 billion people who are currently living. If you cumulatively, from the time the life expectancy started going up, maybe some 3 billion people have lived longer by 10 years or more. Is that small? I mean, the gift of life, even for an hour, is so precious. And we're talking about 37 years. ऐसे ही हो गया. So it's also a question of which lens we use. And so just as, we have to put our innovation instinct to rest and take up the scaling up instinct to make good use of the innovations that are made, we have to also put to rest and be kind to ourselves, put to rest our critical, analytical instinct, and occasionally pat our backs and celebrate, which is where I think we're headed in the next part of this evening. I want to thank you for giving us such a wonderful overview, as well as, a very optimistic view of the world. It was right that
We thought we were witness to a conversation in Davos.
well, but anyway, it was right that I was interviewing you, Shamaran, and not the other way around, because the world is about the future, and you are the one, and several others here, who have to take it forward. The world in 2023 is where it is. I just counted some wonderful things that have happened, and earlier had remarked on some huge challenges that are still confronting us. We have to learn to dream with our eyes open simultaneously. We can be realistic with our eyes open, we'll have no dreams. If you're only dreaming, you have no reality. The developmental task, the social change task, is to be able to do both simultaneously. Shunachen? Okay,
Thank
great.
you so much.
What a wonderful note to end on, huh? Hope, dream with your eyes open, and replicate whatever we do. There cannot be a better thought to move from the two people conversation to the felicitation. I'm really proud to be able to invite now all the development catalysts for the felicitation. May I request Dr. Harsh Kumar Bhanwala to please come. He's the chairperson of the Multi-Commodity Exchange of India, but we know him better as NABARD. Yeah. And he's IIM Ahmedabad graduate as well. So yeah, we are a little bit of a mafia here with Vijay, Savita, me, Dr. Harsh, yeah. If there are any more, please raise your hand. We are the mafia. So, yeah. I think let me just say quickly a little bit how Access decided that when they decided to felicitate two categories, and NGOs with 25 plus years of experience, NGOs with 50 plus years of experience. As usual in Access style, a very clear set of criteria and a very good panel of people who were judging. So the first organization that we will call here is AKRSP, Aga Khan Rural Support Program. Incorporated in 1983, 300 plus projects implemented, 4 states and 1.2 million outreach. Do you want to say a few words? You can.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's really it's a pleasure to receive this award and this platform, along with all this our so many friends from this development sector. And I'm really with my colleagues we are grateful for this event and for this award. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Ambuja Cement Foundation, can we invite you people? Incorporated in 1993, 47 total projects. They work in 11 states and they have reached 3.42 lakh individuals. Please, would you like to say a few words?
So good evening, and I am very thankful on behalf of Ambuja Cement Foundation to the organizer and for this appreciating our work, and also thankful to lakhs of our community members. Because of them, we are here. So I am finally thankful from Ambuja Cement Foundation to all of you. Thank you.
The next organization, again, you people know them very well, is Society for Development Alternatives. Incorporated in 1982, 1,200 plus projects implemented. They work in 17 states and have worked with more than 20 million people.
Good evening, everybody. I'm a tiddler amongst towering personalities of the social world. Of course, having done my tenure of 38 years in uniform and now the last 5 years in the social sector. But I just wanted to stand here and thank Access Foundation and all of you for honoring us. Thank you so very much. And reassuring you of our commitment to people, planet, and their prosperity. Thank you and Jai Hind.
May I call now Development Support Center, DSCA, Ahmedabad people. Incorporated in 1994, 87 total projects, 4 states, and 1.24 lakh households impacted.
A very good evening. I thank to Access Development Services for this great honor. At this moment of joy, I would like to remember our founder, Chairman Shri Anil Bhai Shah. He was a pioneer of participatory natural resource management programs in India. I am also thankful to our ex-chairman, Shri Vijay Mahajanji. He completed our water to wealth journey. Sir, thank you so much for all your mentoring, which is continued till today, and I hope for future also. And I dedicate this award to the millions of marginal farmers of India for which we are working. And you have charged our battery, sir. So we'll do more good work in future. Thank you so much. And to all of you.
Let me invite next India Grameen Services. Is the team here? Incorporated in 1987, 300 plus projects, working in 9 states, and 2 million households impacted.
Thank you so much, Access Development Services, for this opportunity. And it's a wonderful thinking to felicitate all the development catalysts who have contributed for the nation building. So it's an honor for us that we have been celebrated and selected as one of the development catalysts, and where our founder, Mr. Bijay Mahajan, is here. So thank you so much, sir, because you have crafted this organization with a vision to work consciously with the rural India and the marginalized and most vulnerable communities. We are just taking forward the thought he's having along with Deep Joshi Sahab and also Dr. Shankar Datta and many others. Thank you so much.
We come next to our very cherished lady, Chetana, Mandeshi Foundation. Incorporated in 1996, 14 total projects. One of them is the Mandeshi Bank, cooperative bank, 2 number of states, and with 1 million individuals total outreach.
Thanks for this honor, and thank you, Access Development Service. Thanks for the jury who were part of it. And I just we are celebrating 1 million women. So this whole dedication is to millions of women on behalf of Mandeshi. And I would request Supriya, Sarika, जो वो आप बताएगी कि सारिका जैसी कितनी महिलाएं हैं जो हमको बहुत मोटिवेट करती हैं.
Namaste.